Hello and welcome to the Sallen Coefficient, in which I take a nuanced and critical look at some board games, and I'm going to especially tell you how the weight of the game and the amount of overhead it takes and time it takes to play is going to relate to the depth of decisions and how much engagement you're going to be able to get out of the game. So in today's episode of the Sallen Coefficient, we're taking a look at the Castles of Burgundy. This is a game by designer Stefan Feld, and it is one of the highest rated games on Board Game Geek. I'm going to tell you guys whether or not I feel it fits into a high spot on the Sallen Coefficient. And before that, I will go ahead and walk you through kind of what I feel about the different mechanisms going on in the game. One thing I won't do with the Sallen Coefficient is specifically tell you how the game is played or give you a walkthrough. Maybe in later videos I'll do that separately, but at this point, this is mainly intended as a review. There's a lot of really good walkthroughs out there. I suggest you take a look at somebody like Rado does some great run-throughs. The Dice Tower, Tom Bassel does some excellent run-throughs. Here, I'm going to focus on review and commentary. And I'd like you to inform you all that we are sponsored by and coming to you because of Game Surplus. Game Surplus is bringing the world of board games to you. It's a really excellent online board game store where you get the sort of friendly attention that you want from your local game store, but they're very knowledgeable, unlike in most local game stores. Anyway, check them out at gamesurplus.com. So, Castles of Burgundy. It is a game. First of all, let's talk about components really quick, because this is one that I think is almost a poster child for how Euro game components can be done very, very well, but also done very cheaply and in ways that do not really impress the board gaming, collective, especially people that are looking specifically for nice-looking pieces. I'm going to really quickly post this video on here to, I'm going to share this link here on YouTube to my guild, and I apologize for this little moment, but the better I get at this, maybe I'll even be able to edit this out here in post-production. For those of you that are here live with me, that's pretty awesome. You've probably figured out about it through Twitter, if anybody did. Anyway, let me go ahead and make sure that this is something that's possible for people who want to find out here. Okay. Bear with me here, guys. We're just about ready to go. Okay. All right. So, okay, it has been posted there. And I'm watching here in our live chat. I'm going to be doing the pop-out chat. So once I get done with my actual review, I will go ahead and tell you about or I'll answer any questions that you guys have in that chat as we're going here. But I'm not going to be able to really watch it as it goes. I've got a lot of things, a lot of balls I'm juggling otherwise, and I want to make sure that this doesn't have any unnecessary airtime. So as you can see, I'm already really feeling at that. Like I said, maybe in post-production I'll be able to take this out. So let's go ahead and let's kick off this discussion first by talking specifically about the components in the Castles of Burgundy. So it's almost kind of like laughable when people bring up the components. People seem to think that this board right here has some pretty ugly pastel colors going on. Like, it's very drab. Everything is really light. There's not really dark, contrast. Contrast apparently wasn't much of a concern with whoever designed the board. But I personally find that the artwork is very, I don't know, it's really quotidian, just very basic, and to me it's so functional. It really adds a nice little, like, sort of pencil drawing, almost looks like it was on the colored pencil. And I'm actually personally I enjoy the way the artwork looks. I mean, it's very pleasant, if I could describe it in a word. The actual components in the game, though, the actual tiles and boards the tiles are super thin. They used a very thin cardboard here. Like, oh man, like, it's barely cardboard. You can see right through there. And the player boards are just cardstock. They are not actual cardboard. But there is dice in the game, and the dice are just the type of normal, decent dice you'd expect, D6s. And that's where I'm going to start this review. Dice I've had like a real love-hate relationship with them. And I think ultimately I can kind of look at dice as one of the reasons that I ultimately moved on from board games. I just got eliminated one too many times from a game of Risk, or got bankrupt in Monopoly, and thought that, I should move on from games of chance, is what I considered board games. However, when I got back into the hobby, I noticed that input randomness, such as the dice that fuel the resources in Catan, were ones I was much more comfortable playing with. Anyway, the thing is, the more that I played games and the more that I realized, you know, that what Catan does with dice is an input randomness that still really can hurt you in a lot of ways and can take away your options instead of making you think about what to do. I found other games in the hobby that then kind of drew me into, you know, what I would call unlocking the full potential of what you can actually do with dice. And I would say that Castles of Burgundy is a great example of one of the best times, one of the best uses of dice in games, specifically because these are the fuel that just totally are part of the game of Castles of Burgundy run. It's basically everything in the game. You are going to get actions, and your actions are dictated by the numbers on these dice. The potential actions that are available to you will depend on what you roll. And that might seem a little bit pinholing you into specific strategies, but it uses a source of dice mitigation in the form of worker tiles. These worker tiles are going to let you bump up or down a die, and it doesn't even swing around, so a 6 becomes a 1. So really, like, it's just 6 different options, and you're able to impact and decide you're able to really manipulate what exactly is on the face of that dice. So it seems almost like it's barely even input randomness when you think about the fact that you've only got 2 dice, and you're going to have 25 turns in the game, and you're not going to know what, you know, for your first turn in the game, you're going to roll the 2 dice, and you're not going to know what 24 of your next be, and you have to make decisions early. And that might seem like, oh my gosh, like you're basically making decisions when you have no idea what, you know, how much random you're going to have to deal with, or because of randomness, you have no idea what your options are going to be in the future. Anyway, because of that, you would think that these dice would be limiting, but ultimately the game systems are built around making the face value of your die really sort of up to you as to how you're going to let these die not control the game. It's almost like, in a way, the dice themselves are an extra player. The game plays 2 to 4, so it could be like your 5th player in the game, and it's one that everybody in the game, it's almost like a one versus many game where it's you versus your dice. I know to a certain extent you might be able to say this about all dice games, but I think in this case, it almost makes dice into like something that is very beatable, especially if you are able to make informed decisions based on considering what these really mean. And that's because you're not just forced to roll high in this game. In a lot of dice games, it's like you'll take the dice and you want to just roll 5s, 4s, 6s. The more 5s, 4s, 6s, you know, the more high numbers you roll, the better you're going to be. And in this game, you don't necessarily want them. As a matter of fact, what you want is to be able to roll the dice and go with whatever you roll. And you're going to be able to craft your game in such a way that you can do that in most cases. And of course, if you can't, then you can just always have a use for your dice. You turn them into the workers that help you mitigate dice in the future. So anyway, to me, the way that the dice is used in this game is, in a lot of ways, it seems like it's not enough. But as you play, it's so subtle, the amount of control you have over the dice, that by the end, I feel like even if I haven't beat my opponents, I've either beaten or lost to the randomness in this game. And it's my choice and my planning that really ultimately makes that result either in my favor or against me. Anyway, there's a lot more, and I think especially one of the ways that the dice are handled in such a way that you can overcome them is the round structure. Every single round on this public board, you're going to be drafting action tiles, and your action tiles are going to be equally distributed in these different depots, meaning that there's going to be as many 6s available, which you'll need to, of course, use a 6 die to take, as there are 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. So everything is equally distributed. It's just up to you as to which one you want to take. And what else does that depend on is what you personally are going for. Every single thing that you're going to do, I would say that in general, you're going to be wanting to draft tiles from here as much as you can towards the beginning of the round, because that's where you're really fighting and interacting with other players. You're going to be wanting to get as many tiles as you can the first couple of rounds, but you're always limited to only 3. And so you're going to have to put some tiles down. You're going to have to be judicious about giving you the abilities in the early rounds in the early turns of the round to then in the later rounds be not impacted by the dice or be not impacted by the players, by what they took. So you really are able to just, by proper planning and I guess a little bit of good fortune, you're able to, and I don't even want to say that, not necessarily good fortune. You can usually work with what you're given in this game. You're going to be able to really beat the odds here. And on top of that, you've got some tiles that aren't even tied to dice. And tile abilities will let you place and pick up from whatever depot you want. And in this case, what really makes it interesting is that you can kind of look at your own player board, which is my next topic, and you can see what dice values are available to you, what dice you're looking for, and you can try to take something that's going to be something else that you're not necessarily looking for. So if you look at your player board and you're like, oh my gosh, I really need to roll a 5, well, unless you've been, really not rolling any 5s for the entire game, which is going to be tough for you to remember because you don't remember your dice rolls in this game, you're just rolling too much. Fault, because you're the one who's made the choices that have resulted in you needing to roll a specific number. And that's very rare that even comes up, but that has happened, and it does occasionally happen in this game. But like I said, you really can only partially blame the dice. It's mostly up to you. Sure. And the way that you don't necessarily know all of the information, some tiles are used for shipping and they'll accrue in these different areas. The number of these areas just matters for where they go to. It doesn't even matter for what you pick up. Anyway, for when you're selling them, dice are tied to everything here, but it's tied in such a way that you have that control. The game does not use the dice to wrest control from the players and make them of the game systems or of the swing, of an event or something. No, in this game, the players are in control of their own fate because of the round structure and the way that even though you're not knowing what most of your dice rolls are going to be when you make those first decisions, you still are able to work around that by choosing things that let you then in the later turns have more flexibility. So that's the big thing in this game. Your flexibility is up to you. And that's a next level of playing this game. And really, I've been kind of dancing around talking about your player boards because I didn't want to have to show them to you and describe them just yet. But that is another area that just is married so closely to the game board. Every single spot on here has a dice face. You need that dice to place there. Except there's all sorts of different ways that you can build. So you can start in this little green castle down here. And what I always like to do is build what I call tendrils. So will build in a single line that kind of goes up snaking this way. Because you always have to build adjacent to your first tile. But if I can build a tendril down here and a tendril up here, then I can go pretty much anywhere on the board. And so that's really what you're going for in this game. You want to be able to be flexible. That is your control. That's how you beat the randomness. It's something that you are also trying to get the specific type of tile, which your different types of tiles are what my next topic is going to be. But before we move on, let's talk about how each player board is different. So there's this player board, which is actually even like a little mini expansion. I have other player boards down here. And the player boards, first of all, if you want to, you can play on all the same side, which you can see these are identical. And then, well, I guess you can kind of see that. But anyway, on the other side, everything is unique. And there's several different ways where everybody can play with unique ones. What really makes this different is not just that you start here and have access to different types of tiles. It's also that the size of each of these is tied to scoring. The larger it is, the harder it is to fill, but the more points you get. And these little tiny areas of one little hex can be filled up, and you get more points for doing those earlier in the game. So you're going to be trying to race against the clock to fill certain tiles in certain areas. And so as you're crafting your estate, you're going to be really making a lot of decisions there. And I just can't, I can't talk enough about how these player boards really do give you the choice, give you the ability to give yourself flexibility while also trying to combo the different effects of all the different types of locations and play to the strength of your player board. The bigger the area for certain things, the more you got to consider, is this something that's a strategy I can take on? For example, if you got a huge area of brown tiles, they have to be all unique. So later in the game, that's a terrible idea. But if you're earlier in the game, you can really make some cool decisions to start filling up these brown areas that let you later on in the game really get tons of points from big plays. And anyway, yeah, that's the player board's just an absolute stroke of genius. But really, where the game comes down to an excellent design is in these building tiles, not just buildings. There's all different types of tiles. They're all tiles that are going to fill up your estate. buildings are kind of like the largest one. There's more building spaces on your board than anything else, but that's because you have to get unique buildings. You can never build 2 of the same tile in the spot. You can't do 2 churches. No, you can't do 2 churches. You can only do 1 in every little grouping of brown tiles. So you've got to make decisions as to what it is that you're going to be able to fill out when you're placing these tiles. Anyway, what I really love about the design of these tiles is how the building tiles will let you sort of a lot of times break the other rules of the game. Like you place down a building tile and then it lets you slurp up a green tile from wherever you want on that player board that you're drafting. So you're able to really sort of not be so tied to what you roll with your dice. And that just, to me, it breeds these sort of trees, decision trees in my head. Every single turn forms a little decision tree. And since it's normally limited to only 2 actions, that can be really simple. But sometimes you can end up with like multiple actions. You can end up playing 1 tile that lets you play another tile, that lets you pick up another tile, use your other dice to play that tile, which gives you money to then buy a 5th tile. You can end up with lots of strung together actions, and all these action trees are ones where like every single turn I feel like I'm either making an action tree that's really cool, busting a combo, or I'm formulating one that's going to happen on the next turn. There really isn't many turns when I'm like, oh man, all I've got to do here is just ugh. And if I do have that happen, a lot of times that means I maybe had a huge turn before, or I had, mistakes and I suck anyway, and that's definitely a possibility. So Castles of Burgundy's ability tiles, what they all do, the way that you can sort of step in front of another player on the first turn track and on the turn order track, and you're sort of all fighting over who gets to go first. You can end up taking double turns, which just lets you have so much impact on what tiles are available. You can just, in the last turn, pick up all the green tiles, and now your opponent can't finish a big area. You have that ability. You have the ability to deprive, and it really has some of the most nuanced and interesting indirect player interaction I've ever seen in a Euro game. So that's the main topics I had here. The dice are, in a lot of ways, they're kind of like the antagonist of the game, but believe me, if you play right, you can do it. The round structure is one of the ways that the game makes sure that there's an equal distribution of stuff available no matter what you roll. The player board let you even have more control over your flexibility on what you can place where. And they also give you a bit of an overarching strategy. So, and I guess I'm holding this upside down. They give you a bit of an overarching strategy. What am I going to fill out first? Some tiles even give you special abilities. They didn't even talk about that. That's tile abilities. And there are these yellow tiles that sometimes give you special abilities that let you break other rules of the game. And that is just really well designed, and it's all very compact. It's one of the few games where in a 4-player game you're going to see most everything in the game, but I am never really worried about running out of playtime and variability in this game, mostly because there's player boards. Every player board just feels different. You feel like you're trying to do different things. You're being sort of not necessarily rewarded for a specific type of play, but you're always trying to connect yourself to as much as possible. And you are, though, going to be hoping to get certain tiles at certain times, and different player boards will reward different strategies. And that's where I really think Castles of Burgundy shines. Now, there is sometimes in Castles of Burgundy where you can result in kind of what feels like some randomness coming in and just bearing its ugly head. And I would say that specifically when I feel most disappointed is usually the last turn or two, because like the game is ending and it's almost sad that I now know like whether or not I can do, sometimes I'll have one last turn when I've got 2 tiles I want to place, but I don't have enough workers, and I'm just like, well, I hope I roll this and or this. And I generally am sitting there calculating possibilities, and you're occasionally going to end up with some of that. And, another criticism is just that there is, it's a really tactical game. Your overarching strategies are really more like giving yourself flexibility, but you're going to be doing most of your turn on your turn. And that to me, like, it doesn't really do that sort of long-term thing, which makes it, at least in a lot of my friends who are very heavy gamers' minds, almost a filler game. Biggest criticism, though, is player count. Player count in Castles of Burgundy is kind of problematic because I like this game best at its playtime with 2. but you don't see several of the tiles. You don't have control over which tiles are going to be in the game, and you don't know which ones are even going to be available. Whereas in a 4-player game, there's very few tiles you don't see. In a 2-player game, specific tiles that reward some earlier strategies over others may come out in the late game and may end up sort of favoring and, sort of quote unquote handing the win to another player. It's never just handing the win. It's always like just getting a nice little gift. Like it's like, oh man, thanks, thanks game, but it's never like, I win. So anyway, I would just say that at 2 players, I like its time commitment best, because at 3 and especially 4 players, this game can really start to drag. It can end up being sometimes, if you end up with some manipulations on the turn order track, you can end up with other players taking like 5-6 turns before you even get another turn, and you'll end up just sitting there. And since there isn't much to do and it's not your turn, you end up really having some idle time on your turn. Now, the amount of strategy in this game and the amount of depth in it, I think, is really justified. And that's why my specific Sallen coefficient of this game is an 8 out of 10. It's an 8 out of 10 because it can go a little bit longer, but I just absolutely love the way that you're able to give yourself overarching strategies of flexibility and the way that the trees are forming in your head as you're considering what to do on your turn. So 8 out of 10, excellent, excellent choice. One of my favorite games. And my own personal score is going to be a little bit higher than this, a 9 out of 10. And that's because I just love the fact that there's different player boards. I mean, I love it when I can go to a game and I can play it, and it can feel fairly different for me from one play to the next. So that's my own preference there for a variable setup. But that obviously, doesn't impact so much the strategy of the game, the depth of the game. It just gives me a little bit more bells and whistles, a little bit more variety. So it's like, hey, it doesn't change the game that much, but it changes it enough so that it just feels fresh. So let me go ahead here and quickly pull up our pop-up chat. And yeah, it's good to see you, TC. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of The Good, the Board, and the Ugly Sallen Coefficient. I'm your host. I'm Joe Sallen of The Good, the Board, and the Ugly. Thank you to our sponsor, Game Surplus. Thank you to everybody who stopped by and watched this one. And catch me next time on the Sallen Coefficient.